talked a lot about what is dyslexia. Dyslexia means a disorder of constitutional origin manifested by a difficulty in learning to read, write, or spell, despite conventional instruction, adequate intelligence, and sociocultural opportunity. So basically they're saying that this kid has been taught, it's given instruction, they have adequate intelligence, but something is not right, something is not clicking for them. So this is our definition that you would find in our dyslexia handbook. Also, I have the definition from, oh, like how this thing won't let me click enter. That's annoying. Okay, so this one is from the International Dyslexia Association, and it's just a little more in-depth, but the one word I wanted to point out was the neurobiological. Even in that myth video, she said it's neurological in origin, and we know that. It's the way the brain works and the pathways. However, they added this, it always used to say neurological, and now it says neurobiological because they are learning the genetic tie and how really all reading difficulty can be tied back to genetics. And so if the parent struggles with reading, that's a huge risk factor for those kids. I know whenever I do the dyslexia testing for the Purple Track, and so when I get those forms and the parents write on there, a lot of times they have like the survey and the parent writes, I'm dyslexic or my husband is dyslexic. That really sends up a red flag for me.
In the testing, does that actually count towards like a numeric value that they?
It doesn't in that sense, but it definitely goes into the decision process. That's definitely a part of it.
If it's on the fence or something.
Yeah, especially that. If you're looking at a kid and you're like, I'm noticing this, and then they have that really would help to qualify them. And then some misconceptions, we've gone over a bunch of those already, but people with dyslexia can't read, and I get this all the time from my big kids that I teach, my 7th graders especially. They'll look at me like, oh, you're really gonna make us do this? And I have to tell them, I know that you can read, but my job is to help you be a better reader, help you create those pathways in your brain that is gonna make it easier and make you a more fluent reader. So yes, they can read, obviously, but my goal is to make them do it faster, more fluently. High intelligence, we talked about that. Intelligence does not predict dyslexia, and many highly intelligent people have dyslexia. They say that even Albert Einstein had dyslexia, tons of people. So definitely nothing to do with that. Dyslexia is not rare, and dyslexia cannot be diagnosed until 3rd grade. This is a horrible misconception. We want to diagnose those kids as early as possible. And I don't know if you guys have any experience with this in your family, but my sister is dyslexic, and she is severely dyslexic. She had a horrible time in school. Well, she has he just turned 3 this week. And so I've been kind of like eyeballing that kid because I'm thinking, I know a lot about this, and I know that is a huge risk factor. And so he was a late talker, and he's still struggling with his speech, and I know that she had dyslexia, so I'm looking at my nephew like, okay, we're gonna get this kid identified, and we're gonna do it quickly, because the earlier you intervene, the better. Definitely don't wanna wait until 3rd grade. That would be sad for those kids, because those are the ones that come to me in secondary, and then I have to start doing the intervention with them, and they're missing out of, you know this in teaching in high school, core important classes. I have to pull them out of to do an intervention, and they are looking at me like, I'm missing a test, I'm missing this, I'm missing that. You know, it becomes very difficult. So the earlier, obviously, the better, and the more success the intervention has. It's just some more misconceptions. They will grow out of dyslexia. That is not true. It is not curable. Only thing that you can do is give that intervention and help them learn, help them change the way they read, but it's not going to go away. And then this is a big one, the letter reversals, we talked about that. B and D, that is developmental, every kid does that. I mean, I still have, my big kids still do that, I'm like, what are you doing? But that's easy to mix up. So these are some of the early warning signs, like I talked about with my nephew, mild speech or articulation problems, and trouble rhyming words, that's a big one. Because I do this, I look at every kid like, what, I'm like eyeballing all these kids, but my daughter is in Pegasus at Bentley, and I look at her all the time, and it makes me wonder, like, I try to rhyme with her, I try to do all these things, but it's so common, it really is, and so I feel like you just gotta watch out for these little warning signs. Risk factors. This talks a lot about the unexpectedness. So if you have a kid who is reading on a low level, but they should, an older student, well, obviously that's gonna be a bigger risk factor. But if you have a kid who is in the early stages of learning to read and they're slightly behind, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're dyslexic, but it does bring up red flags for just some risk factors. And then this also mentions the family history. We talked a lot about that already, but it's strongly determined by genetic predispositions. So some more risk factors. Now they're gonna break it down by ages. So these are the preschool ones. We talked about this, the delay in learning to speak, the delay in the ability to rhyme. And this one goes into pronunciations. But something we notice a lot with our dyslexic students is it's connected so many times with speech students. So if you have a speech student who's also struggling to read, that's a big red flag, because a lot of times, so many of my students are speech students. And then also, we'll talk about later some of the other things that can go with it, but ADHD, that's another, call it the comorbid. So this is kindergarten, so now we're getting into school age, breaking words apart, manipulating sound. So if you told a kid, this is on the TPRI, if you've ever given that assessment, when you have to ask a kid, okay, say the word rat. Now say the word rat without the sound, and they have to say at. A student with dyslexia, especially a young student with dyslexia, would have an extremely difficult time breaking that word apart and segmenting it. And so that's a big red flag for our first and kindergarten teachers. Decoding single words and isolation. So a lot of these students, they use everything else besides their reading skills. So they look at the pictures, they look at everything to help them. So if you give them a list of words in isolation, meaning just a straight list on a white piece of paper, that blows their mind, because they can't use anything else to help them figure out the word. And then of course spelling, that's a huge one. And then second and third grade, so things are getting a little more difficult in school, things are getting a little harder, and so you might notice these things. We have decoding single words, being able to read fluently. This is where this will start to really come in. Reading slowly or inaccurate or without expression. So when a teacher is reading with those kids at reading group or things like that, this will start to show up. Difficulty with written expression. A lot of students have dyslexic students have a really difficult time with organization and being able to put their thoughts onto their paper in an organized way. So that will start to show up. Here's some for 4th through 6th grade. Reliance on listening rather than reading for comprehension. These students are gonna avoid reading at all costs. They're not gonna wanna do that. I had some of my students last year, they would ask me, can you read my test to me? Because they had oral administration. I'd say, sure, if I'm here, if I'm on this campus and you're taking your test and I don't have a group, come in, I'd be happy to read it to you. Well, they would bring me those reading assessments where they have to read the passage and then the questions. And I would say, okay, well, I'm gonna give you a few minutes to read the passage, you know, and then I'll read the question and answers. Well, they, in like a minute and a half, they would say, okay, I'm good. I'm like, did you read the passage though? Yeah, I'm good. I'm like, no, you didn't, because I read with you every day, and I know that you can't read that passage in a minute and a half. There's no way. So they were like, I'd rather just take the quiz, answer the questions. I'm not even gonna bother. And I'd have to, here we go again. You can't do that. We have to read it. It's so important. But they really will. They'll just avoid it at all costs. Even though they know they're gonna fail that test, they'd rather still not read the passage. And then here are some for middle school and high school. Again, avoiding to read. And the biggest one here is the difficulty learning a foreign language. I mean, think about it. If you have a hard time with your own language, how are you going to learn a different foreign language? So that's a really good one to look for the older kids. And I had a student at Fulshire High School last year that qualified, which is more rare for the older kids to qualify. And we were talking to the parents, like, so weird. I mean, she's in all AP classes, she's got straight A's. You know, what even made you refer her for testing? You know, we did find she was dyslexic, but we thought it was so strange. And they said she has straight A's because she spends 4 to 5 hours on homework every single night. And they said she's committed to it, and we love her for it, but we know this kid that's not normal. She shouldn't take that long to do her homework when she's in all AP classes. She's a smart girl, but she said, it's so difficult for me. I have to read everything 2, 3, 4 times before I can ever do my work. So I thought, golly, that's so interesting. She's able to do that. Obviously high IQ, but yeah, she qualified. Isn't that crazy? Okay, so some characteristics. This is straight out of our dyslexia handbook, and it says that students identified as dyslexia typically experience primary difficulties in phonological awareness, including phonetic awareness and manipulation, single word reading, reading fluency, and spelling. I personally always get mixed up with the phonological versus the phonemic awareness. It's kind of like, all mixed up in my head. But for the phonological awareness is more kind of like overarching, like being able to rhyme, like kind of understanding of language. And then the phonemic awareness, that's more about the smallest sounds, which are phonemes, and so that's the phonemic awareness. And that's what I talked about. A kid could never break apart a word, like say cat, now say cat without the k. They can't do that, and that's manipulating the sounds. And then single word reading, that's the isolation we talked about. Fluency, spelling. And then of course, when you're having this much trouble with reading, you're obviously not gonna do very good with your reading comprehension or on tests, and then that just triggers all the, every subject, because if they can't read, well, they're not gonna do very good in math on their math test, and they're not gonna do very good in science, you know. It just trickles down. So here's just a few more. Reading difficulty, words in isolation, we talked about that, spelling, and then the oral reading. And this is what I do with most of my day. I go with the bigger kids, I work on their reading fluency and reading out loud, and a lot of them will tell me, you know, I can read a lot better in their head, but they read out loud to me. We work on their fluency, their rate, their accuracy, and we have goals we set. I want them to be at 98% accuracy. I want them to be reading over 120 words a minute, so they know, and that's what we work on each day. Reading and spelling characteristics that are most associated with the following. Rapid calling the names of familiar objects, colors, letters, or the alphabet. So anything speed like that is extremely difficult for them. That's why you'll see, and I know you see this for sure in your ARDS, but the main two accommodations that these students will get is oral reading of their assessments and then extra time. They have to have that extra time to think. And my sister, like I told you, she was severely dyslexic in school, and she's always said that if my teacher would just give me a minute to think, I could answer. I do know the answer, but it just takes me a minute to be able to recall that information and get it out. But, so just, that's something to think about when you're working with these kids, that you just need that extra